You'll all remember back at the end of the summer as our federal election was beginning, the crisis in Afghanistan, the Taliban swept back into power. Thousands of people were suddenly on the move, trying to find safe harbor somewhere. Canada said we'd take in 40,000, but what we meant is we'd taken 40,000 from the neighboring countries. Afghans in Afghanistan who actually had links to Canada, they'd worked with our military, they'd worked with our government, they'd worked with our NGOs. Basically, they were on their own. Unless they could maybe make it to Kabul airport or somehow get themselves out of the country, we weren't going to be able to do much for them. And stories that have emerged since have been of complete bureaucratic dysfunction on the Canadian end. We had no ability to get these people to safety. Our government insisted on, well, let's only put as many evacuees onto the plane as we have seatbelts for, instead of cramming in as many human beings as possible and getting them the hell out of danger. We've continued to hear stories since of organizations and individuals, NGOs, civil society groups, journalism enterprises who worked with people in Afghanistan giving up, saying there's so much bureaucratic resistance from the Canadian government, we can't get these people out. We're hearing similar stories now from Ukraine, where the Canadian government has said, hey, Ukrainians, come on in. All you need to do is send us the appropriate forms in triplicate and get us your biometric data. It all speaks to a pattern that even during emergencies, the Canadian bureaucracy continues to function as normal. I don't mean Canadian here as a euphemism or stand-in for federal. This is something we've seen across the board in Canadian governments, especially during the pandemic. We've seen some dysfunction at the federal level, but we've also seen a lot of the provinces grapple with their own versions of this. And I think it's all a meta problem in Canadian governance, where you, as a Canadian, will get good service from your level of government. Not necessarily great service. Like, we can quibble about efficiencies and all that stuff, but you will be able to expect a reasonably consistent level of service for things that government already provides. I live in Toronto. When I drag my trash out to the curb every other week, I'm pretty confident it's going to get picked up. And if ever there's an issue, and once or twice there has been, you call the city, they send a truck, and it's done. You know, education in the provincial responsibility. So again, I live in Ontario. Yeah, I mean, we can quibble about education. We can ask about value for money, but the school's going to be there. Like, when I send my kids there, unless the teachers are on strike or something, the school will be there, the classes will be run. The governments know how to provide the services they already provide. There is a kind of muscle memory or institutional memory that allows them to do it. Where we struggle, though, is either with new situations or changing situations, because the Canadian government, and again, I mean this collectively, not just the federal government, doesn't know how to move to an emergency footing. We're seeing that now with the reports of Canadian groups or individuals giving up on getting people out of Afghanistan because they can't navigate the Canadian red tape. We're seeing it now in Ukraine, where there are Ukrainians who want to get the hell out, and there are Canadians here who'd be willing to help them. But the emergency process that the Canadian government has set up isn't actually treating the emergency like an emergency. It's like, well, okay, well, obviously we must respond to this emergency with an emergency program, and here's all the normal bureaucracy we'd insist on if you just wanted to come over and go visit Banff or something. Like, there is no ability in our government to pivot from a normal peacetime operation to an emergency footing. I think a lot of people, probably influenced by the movies, usually think that governments have sort of vast reserves of unused manpower or material or expertise, military leaders, scientific leaders, medical experts that just sort of sit around, but in an emergency, we call them out. No, it's not like that. Competence does not scale up in line with a crisis. The government that runs things at a normal level of operations is the same government you use during a fast-moving emergency, but we don't understand this. Again, I think we've been too influenced by the movies. Again, competency doesn't scale up in times of crisis. The government that is reasonably good at keeping schools open, mailing you a passport and picking up the trash from your curb, is the same government that deals with a novel coronavirus pandemic, a war in Europe, and God only knows whatever the hell else is going to be coming our way. If it is a new threat, or if it's a threat that's changing from the status quo, we could say rapid rise in housing prices over the last few years, our governments don't know how to deal with it. I think this is probably a combination of kind of the psychology of government. Canada, a very stable, blessed country. We don't plan for emergencies. Part of it is also, honestly, just bureaucratic sort of red tape catching and smothering everything. But I think some of it has also got to be on us, the public. We need to start demanding better, not only from our governments in normal operations, but we need to start demanding better from our governments in emergencies. There are Afghans who will die because we did not get them out. There are probably Ukrainians who will die because we did not get them out. There are Canadians who did die because we were not ready for this pandemic. Are you going to accept this, or is it time to demand better?